Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, beginnings.
Beginnings, okay.
I've been described as a good beginner many times. I love beginnings. I really do. I love, I've heard it described as East energy on the Native American medicine wheel. I have heard it described as creator energy. I love beginnings. And they happen all the time.
Yeah.
They happen all the time. I want to talk about beginnings specifically in the context of like, how do we open up a relationship? So if you have an established relationship, or if you have an established pattern of only having practiced monogamy or the mono imagination, how do we do this? How do I actually do it?
So how do you begin
Not just how do I,
a new pattern, a new habit, a new
yeah. So
way?
we've done previous episodes where I've brought up the question, like, how do I ask? How do I, how do I engage with a partner about this? This is a little different. I want to talk about really like, what do I do? Because it's great. Like once you get buy-in from people and people are willing to explore this with you, and if you're solo right now, you can get buy-in from yourself. And in fact, that's super important. Getting yourself in full consent to, I am exploring a relationship design that it's away from the mono norm. I'm going to really intentionally allow myself to begin fresh.
That idea of letting yourself begin fresh, letting yourself, getting the buy-in from yourself, that is in fact really key. If you are partnered and you want to have the conversation with your partner, yeah, that's a very important. You're going to want to have the conversation with yourself too. You're really going to want to understand where you're coming from.
Right. So I talk about enthusiastic informed consent in my favorite event. So there's a salon. It's offered most months. There's one. The next one is coming up in July, where I talk about the 5 pillars you want in place when you're opening up. And the first one is enthusiastic informed consent. I need you to know that it is also self-consent. But on top of that, we need to acknowledge the fact that opening also means action. So frequently I see people say that they want to explore opening, or they've been fantasizing about it for a long time, or playing with the idea, or they've been recognizing that this is who they are. This is how they operate in the world. Whether you see this as an orientation or a philosophy or a choice, doesn't really matter to me. If you are recognizing that this is you, okay, well, what do we do? Because moving from a position of this is what I want into this is how I act, it is
Oh,
huge.
that's a significant change.
So one of the big differences between you and I is that I like beginnings because I love the initial actions. I love the initial actions. I like the mess that happens when we get in and start doing stuff. You love beginnings as well, but you tend to like the dreaming state.
I like the beginning energy,
Yeah.
dreaming, imagination, and then when I get to the actions, I have a different response to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have found that you've become increasingly more able to really embody the actions of beginnings. But that difference has been really important because one of the things that you wanting to stay in that beginning energy where you're planning and dreaming and thinking about but not taking action, that has created some space for us to bring intentionality, right? To really
yeah.
self-interrogate, to get present to the possibilities. What could happen next? So I love that your energy of being a little bit more slow paced there. And well, you have named it. I'm using your words.
Okay. Yeah.
Cosign only if you want. You have said that this is your laziness. You've said, I don't want to take the actions. I just want to stay in the imagination. So I don't have to do anything.
I do. I call it my laziness. And it's also something else, which is, I think now that we're talking, I um I I shy away from moving too fast toward action because for so much of my life I have just wandered around and poked stuff and opened doors and just did whatever I felt like doing, and it caused a lot of problems for the people around me as well as not really changing my life that much. Like it didn't make things better.
Oh, you
So
didn't get sustained change afterward.
no, and you mentioned the, the intentional, like, okay, what's going to happen here? Well, if I just randomly do stuff, anything could happen. I don't know. It's not part of a plan. It's not part of a design.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh, that's not going anywhere. I need to back off a little and try to get some kind of idea in place, some point of view before I take action. And it takes so long that
Well,
I stay in that for
so
a very long time. But
we've been a good balance
yeah,
this way where I tend to get myself in order pretty quickly and be like, okay, what's the
yeah.
next step? What do we do? Um I want to also name that thing that you have called laziness.
Mhm.
It could be nervous system dysregulation. If you are
It
feeling
really seems like that should have occurred to me before.
okay, I mean, if you
Yeah, okay.
so I'm
That
thinking about
lands
the
well.
last big change that I knew you wanted to instigate in your own life,
Mhm.
and you are still struggling with. And I can see the signs of your nervous system being dysregulated around it. You've been wanting to shift your workout pattern because we haven't been consistent recently, which is not in line with our general being. But you have been consistently calling that laziness. I'm too lazy to get started. But I don't think it's laziness. I think you're experiencing dysregulation, and how that looks. Here's what I witness. How it looks is you mumble a little bit more when you're talking about it.
Yes,
You
right.
look down and away. You make a statement, and it's a very black and white statement. Like I'm going to do this thing. It's all or nothing. I'm going to do this thing, and there's not a lot of room for failure. And those are all signs that I recognize in you as you're dysregulated. And that's okay if you recognize it, because you could then take action
Yeah,
to regulate,
to
right?
regulate and then so that is interesting, and for the topic that we're talking about now, so as someone reaches toward opening up, new relationship design, one of the things that can get in the way of taking the actions to make the sustained change is your own nervous system dysregulation.
Right. So your nervous system is just not on board yet.
Yeah.
In fact, I see that. So every single week that I have an opening where I'm like doing calls and people are connecting with me about whether to work with me, I see people show up who are experiencing dysregulation. That is not a moral failing. That is not a, that is, and it actually tells me nothing about whether you will be able to do this well. Like just the fact that you are experiencing dysregulation does not mean you won't be able to do the opening process really well. Um, can you do it really, really well, but you have struggled over and over again with getting dysregulated around like reopening your dating profiles,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. I
but you
think
do it well once you're in it. And one of the ways you do that is we have practices
we have practices.
to
It's
help you deal with all of that, what your body's reaction
yeah.
is.
And I
Because
could feel when you describe the black and white, the stark statements and the yeah, that's me trying to bull my way past the dysregulation. I'm just gonna push it out and just I'm gonna claim this thing. Your nervous system doesn't really respond to that generally.
yeah,
It's
it doesn't
still
like it.
going to be dysregulated and it might even get worse. So but with the tools that we have, yeah, I've
So
been able to get around some of that.
we like neurosomatic intelligence for this particular purpose. Breath work, going for a walk. Going for a walk is possibly the simplest thing. And I want to acknowledge that not everyone can walk. So whatever movement you can get, where you are moving through space and you are seeing trees and you're seeing landscape pass by you, that stimulates your neurological system in a particular way. It is calming for the body. So that's one of the simplest ones. And but getting in the shower can also work. And getting new input to your system when you're feeling dysregulated. So now that we've said that, we've also introduced the idea that at the beginning doesn't mean we're just at the beginning of how do I open up. It also means I'm at the beginning of how will I do relationships differently? How will I do this differently? And so sometimes that is not people who are opening up for the first time. Sometimes they've been open for a while, but they're feeling all the wobbles. This has not been everything that they'd hoped, and instead it's been some other stuff. Or it's just played out. Like they started off saying, we'll only play together, or yeah, we're gonna do this, but there won't be any feelings, or we're gonna put limits around how close we can be to people, or how many dates we can have, or we are only going to experience this in a certain way, and we're both going to experience it the same way. We'll stay exactly on the same page the whole time.
So they try to create boundaries. I mean, we, not they, we
Yeah.
try to create boundaries to maintain the stuff we want to keep.
Which makes sense from a nervous system perspective. It makes sense
Yeah.
that you'd be like, I need to create boundaries that will stop me from experiencing change happening from the outside. Because that's how I'll stay safe.
Safe. There it is. Yeah.
Nervous system's just asking all the time, how do I stay safe? How do I stay safe? Um, and oh, the experience of opening, I mean, I have said it before, I'll say it again. It is not, it is not just about opening a relationship. It's about opening yourself, opening your imagination, opening yourself up to the what ifs and the things that you haven't considered. I consider non-monogamy to be a path of individuation because it will necessarily confront you with aspects of self that are not currently in your conscious awareness. That's dysregulating.
That is, well, that is automatically dysregulating. Yeah.
But
So
now I want to just pull it back in and say dysregulation in itself, like there's like pathological levels, like where it has gotten out of control. And then there's, yeah, we don't want our nervous systems to stay perfectly level all the time. We want to be able to experience flexible, dynamic change. We want resilience here because that's how we get to do this awesome stuff where we change who we are and we change how we relate and we change how we exist in the world. That's how we do that.
so what we're trying to avoid is intolerable dysregulation.
Right.
You dysregulate, you're not even keeled anymore. You're feeling up or you're feeling down, but it's like, yep, I can handle this. I will carry on. I'm still me.
And I'm going to say, I'm going to go even a step further. I think
What you
that
got?
when when we open up, when we're at the beginning, it is definitely common to experience intolerable dysregulation. So then I want to talk about what are my tools for getting that back into my window of tolerance? What will my methods be? And this is where I think it's important to talk about why I I don't recommend people just willy-nilly like throw caution to the wind like okay, we'll open. I think of that as well, it's destructive testing, right? It's not I like to take a tactic with opening where we're a little methodical. We get into I treat this as an experimental opportunity where we get really thoughtful about how we're doing this so that when we have an experience where we can throw caution to the wind, we also know that we're getting something out of it. The something doesn't have to be the delicious, yummy, perfect experience we wanted. But if the something is information, new knowledge
Mhm.
about how I operate in relationships and where my level of tolerance is right now, my capacity, where my weak spots are, where I need to do work, where my childhood wounds are, what I can do, like that in itself is a win. So, I mean, I think of, and the reason I work with people in groups now, I still do individual coaching and I love it and happy to work with people that way. But when I do individual coaching for people who are also opening up, I strongly recommend that they participate in a group as well because the the things that we experience, these are the experiments. We can learn from other people's experiments too.
Oh yes. That's a fantastic way.
I
of
mean,
gathering information.
that's the science, right? Like, I
That's
I
the
mean, I do it
science. Yeah.
all day, every day.
Yeah.
I look at I'm reading journals, I'm looking at what do my colleagues, what have they learned? And what have they then written down and helped me to understand so I don't have to do everything. So the being in a container where you can thoughtfully go through a process of opening where you don't rely on hyper boundaries to try to keep you safe from change, but instead you thoughtfully experiment, collect data on how that felt, how it went, what worked, what didn't work, and then adjust and try again. Like that's
You describe that, and I feel like excitement in my
mm.
chest. And that's partially because I love a well designed experiment. I think it's fun.
I mean, you trained for it.
I trained for it. But the other thing is, I've had, depending on how you want to look at it, I have three significantly different experiences with, I mean, I've been open for decades, I guess, at this
Yeah,
point.
I mean, yeah, that's how
But
old you are,
been
huh?
polyamorous for decades. And but the way I've approached it, basically three different ways, two of which were just completely winging it.
And they didn't fit your being,
Oh no, they didn't fit my being at all.
but you
And
didn't learn that very fast
no, it's
because of
really
the
hard.
winging it.
Yeah. Um, I I I know how good science feels versus bad science.
Mm.
I've done both. And this was an example of bad because you mentioned data collection. I didn't I The data collection was always what's happening in this moment. What's happening in this moment? There wasn't tracking of the changes over time. There wasn't careful observation of what did I just do? What choice did I just make that led to this other change?
Yeah.
There were no theories about, well, what if I or we as a group tried this thing? Let's see what happens, and then communicate about it. All get on board and see what happens. In the first bunch of experiences, I didn't do any of that. It was just, okay, take action, see what happens. And one of the reasons I think is that I grew up and learned from my environment that love in particular is supposed to be organic. It's not supposed to be
Mm.
planned. It's supposed to be spontaneous. You're not supposed to have a plan. You're not supposed to
It
have
has to have
a
mystery.
mystery. You're supposed to let the next moment unfold. And because we're so in love, it's going to unfold in this beautiful flower and not the freaking bonfire that I'm looking at right now. Um,
And that's how you'll identify. So
yeah,
it is also
yeah,
tautological. If you have true
that's
love,
right.
it won't need
Yeah,
examination, but also if you examine it, it isn't
it
true
isn't true
love.
love.
So
And I would
there's a
just like to
problem with
say
that.
there's a problem with that. And I no longer believe that. And I'm so excited. And that's one of the places the excitement comes from is, oh, we can apply all the tools and techniques we have as humans for learning how to make our environment better to love. Awesome.
Right. To love, to sex too.
To sex.
Yes. I
Guess what? That doesn't have to unfold moment by moment in this
like
mysterious way either.
any given experience of sexual joy and pleasure can be that unfolding.
You can't
But
eliminate the mystery no matter how hard you try.
right.
You
And
don't
that's
have
like,
to
I love that.
manufacture it or preserve it. No, it's right there. I love that. So it just accept it when it comes and don't try to
But we
jam it
also
in.
get to be intentional. So the steps I'm hearing here, and this is very much how I work in the year of opening, is like the steps are intentionality. We know what we're committing to, and then we go through a process. And the process is not just slapdash, hodgepodge. Let's try this tool. Let's try this tool. Well, let's try this tool. It's instead a thoughtful exploration that builds. It builds over time. I mean, there's a reason I ask people to stay with me for a year, and that's because we need to experience not just outer change, but the inner transformation. And change is something that happens outside. Transformation happens inside. Transition happens inside. Transition is literally the psychological integration of what the change has brought. And so in order to actually transition from a monogamous imagination, a monogamous paradigm to a non-monogamous paradigm, no matter how many people you're sleeping with, no matter how many people are in your life, it does like that's not the thing. It's the paradigm shift. No matter how, no matter what you do, that is going to be an internal transition that allows you to have a changed experience in your outer world and to have experienced deeply the new consciousness of like, oh,
Yeah.
this is how I'm doing relationships for good, for bad, for indifferent. This is how I do this. Um, and so often when people are first opening up, I hear them say things like, I want to have like good starter boundaries. What are the good like what's the best way like right out of the gate, what are the rules we should have in place to keep us safe? It's a sweet question. Like it makes my like 14 years ago when I was opening, I had the same question. And there's a beautiful gentle naivete in it. And it kind of misses the point because it there is this idea that if we just get that right, if we get the boundaries right, if we get the rules set up right, that we won't have to experience the change and then actually let it become a transition where I am now changed. I have transitioned into a new version of me. But that's why I think of this as an individuation process, not so much about a like a like relational it's not just about your relationships,
It's about
but who you are.
who you are, and it can absolutely feel uncomfortable to commit to changing who you are. Now, spoiler alert, you can't help but change who you are
Yeah, that's
if you're
happening
still
anyway.
alive. That's just going to happen. Um, and but it's still
My dad really
uncomfortable.
tried.
He did. He
He
put his time in.
tried hard not
Yep.
to change, especially those last 10 years.
Yeah.
He dug his heels in hard and literally sat in a chair and tried not to change.
Yep. He literally wouldn't admit that the roof was falling down.
Yeah, and it was yeah. It it and
So
yet
you're
here's the thing, it did change. I know this because his body died.
right.
Change happened.
He was
I
changing.
it is a stark metaphor, but having lost a lot of people in my life, one of the things that I take away from that is that every single change, every single transition is also universal. Watching my father choose that path and letting it impact how I meet change is, I think, the best honor I could give him. Letting his choice to be stalwart and to resist the changes that were happening. I mean, I was also married to somebody who tried to do that, resist
Yeah.
changes that were happening. They still happen. They still
They
happen. And
still
so
happen.
what do we do with that? With the fact that your our relationships are changing for good, for bad. They just are.
One of the things that I think about when I run across people who are resistant to change and who think that it's best to just stay who you are. I happen to know that one of the ways that I used to be was I didn't know how to feed myself or go to the bathroom in a bathroom.
Oh, that's true. You were a baby
Right?
once.
I was a baby once, and I don't really want to continue being that person. I would
Right.
like to learn new things. Um, but it absolutely is uncomfortable, and it's more uncomfortable for
So some people are really risk intolerant,
mhm,
right? And I see this happen quite a bit, and I see it with at all different ages and phases. I have seen teenagers be super risk avoidant and therefore like resist their very growing. Like they resist actually like cellularly growing. I have also seen
yeah,
70-year-olds, dig in and be like, nope, I am who I am, who I am. And that is one of the phrases that you'll hear people say, I am who I am, or it is what it is. Those are useful phrases up to a point, but they can also be incredibly constricting And and if you relate to other humans in any way, in other words, if you don't live in a mountain alone on another planet where there aren't other humans, um, we exist with other humans around. And so how I experience change is being,
Yeah.
just by being. And being in close relationship means that I am exposed also to your changes, and your
Right.
changes will interact with mine. And that can be so threatening. Like, what is all this stuff?
Right.
What's happening right now? Why are you all of a sudden talking about opening up? Or yeah, I know we're open, but why do we have to be polyamorous? Why can't we just keep playing
Yep.
only together? Or when I hear people at one of these spots, I'm reminded that, your body wants to be safe. Your nervous system wants to be safe, but also we can just get dug in to the idea that I know who I am. I
Mhm.
don't want to have to update that. I want to, I would just rather not chance it. Other people um are more of a throw your cap over the wall kind of person, and they're like, "Nah, I don't really know what's on the other side. I'm just going to go." These people always marry each other, by the way. So if you're finding yourself in a spot where the idea of a new beginning for your relationship feels almost impossible, it's worth taking stock. Is that because you imagine that somehow you can avoid change, that you can avoid the fact that we are all aging, we will all die. Finitude is real.
It's real.
We, the only thing that makes life what it is the fact that the one thing we all share is we will all die someday. Things just got real dark
Things
in
got
here,
dark. And
but
here's the thing, I one of the things that I wanted to say in this podcast, so it's out in the world for people to listen to, is yeah, this is kind of hard
and it's special.
and it's special.
I'm really glad to get to do this hard stuff next to
Yeah.
you, but I'm also really glad to have put myself into a paradigm where I'm constantly challenged to not believe that I am one thing.
Yes.
So new people come into my life and they see me in new ways. New people come into my life and hurt me in new ways. That, yeah, that happens, and I grow and I change because of it. Um, One of the things that I love about being intentional, though, about beginnings is instead of creating these parameters, these rules that will keep me safe, instead of doing that, I can create thoughtful experiments. I have a particular way that I like to do this with people. If you're in the year of opening, this will already be familiar to you because this is the relationship technology that I talk about. Um, I think of relationship agreements as core, right? They're so, so important and they're so wonderful. And being in a negotiated relationship, no matter what that looks like, as far as like how many partners you have, being in a negotiated relationship is pretty awesome because it means you've increased the consciousness. But in order to do that, you have to be able to make agreements, which means it means collaborating. Like that is literally what agreement means. Now, if I'm making an agreement with myself, I still have to all my parts got to get on board and they have to consent, and then we have to get in integrity and hold ourselves to it. But as soon as I take that into the outer world and I want to have an agreement with you or with any of my partners, okay. Personally, I want to process. I like teaching things in specific, clear processes. I do not see any reason that we should all be out there trying to reinvent
That's it. Yeah,
constantly.
I don't see that we should not lean on each other for
Right.
the things that we have learned along the way.
So the technology I use for beginning to learn about agreements is the minimum viable agreement process. So I call them MVAs. The MVA is designed to be a small container that is really intentional about what we're experimenting on, how long we're doing this experiment, and what our deal breakers are, what the edges are. And this is key. And then there's a review process. Because most people I see exploring their new beginnings forget that it's not just about constantly putting out the little fires that start, because they will. It's also about reviewing and showing gratitude for what's working, celebrating the wins, and then doing that after action review and deciding what's the next adjustment. What do we change next? Because the experiment is only as good as I mean, who cares if I'm doing experiments if I just throw all the data out and
Right.
never look back?
Yeah. Yep.
And now I'm reminded of our early days when
Yes,
you would
exactly.
refuse to, like, write things down.
Yeah.
You would
And
just
even when I did
refuse
write
to.
them down, they'd go in a book that I never looked at again.
Or
What's the
or you'd
difference?
literally
Or
accidentally
I'd throw
throw
them
them
away. Yeah.
away. Yeah, and
Mhm.
we don't have time to go into all the
No,
reasons that that might
we
be,
really don't.
but
It's a lot.
it's really interesting to think about how different from the moment we started creating agreements that had very specific parameters that followed the process, the MVA process. I mean, this didn't come out of nowhere. This came out of more than a decade of you and I trying to figure out how do we do these experiments in a way that we don't have to think so much. We can just get into it,
Yeah.
perform the experiment in our relationship,
Yep.
experience it, and then do that review so that we can now figure out what's next.
So what I think I'm hearing here is you mentioned that people will say, what are good starter boundaries? And you can't tell them what good starter boundaries are because there is no way to do this. And you don't know what they need. But what you can tell them, what I'm hearing, is how to have a conversation that will lead them to good starter boundaries. That you can help them with.
Right. Because let's get clear, a boundary is about how I am going to treat my space, like what I am going to allow in my space. It can't be about what I'm going to require of someone else. And so having boundaries it's a rough spot to start from. It's much easier to start from an intentional experimental design. And it's super important to get clear on how we're talking about this. If I use boundaries improperly, I can weaponize them. I can say,
Oh,
you broke my
yeah.
boundary, you violated my boundary, and therefore now you get punished. Um, I truly believe in consequences. Like also they exist, like action begets consequences. That's just the definition of it. Consequence just means what comes after. So yeah, you can have any agreement you want. You can have any boundary you want. But if we don't know what comes next, if we don't know what the consequences are, um, probably we don't really have an agreement or a boundary. What we have is an idea, an ideal, and it's really hard to actually expect that to be upheld. So I'll give an example of this. If I have a boundary um, that you violate, let's say I decide that you need to be home by 11 p.m. every night. Well, it's so easy for me to now say, this is my boundary. Well, first off, that's about what you do, not what I
Right.
do.
Right.
It would be much, much more advantageous for me to start from my position and say, hey, um, I I need to make sure I rest. So if you're coming home late, I'm going to need you to sleep somewhere else because I need to rest and I can't be woken up and that will
So
disturb
now
me.
you have
So
your
now
boundary
I have
for
my
you,
boundary for
not for
me
me.
about how my experience will go. But really importantly, even if even if the even if you get caught in the trap of like setting rules for each other, even if that is where you are, you still need to know what happens next.
Right.
Cuz legitimately, I would rather know. Like, if you're gonna go down the punishments route, if that's actually what you're gonna do,
You might
hey,
want to
at least,
weigh the pros and
well,
cons and
at
be
least
able to do the.
well, no, admit it. Just admit it. If we're gonna punish each other, let's admit it.
Oh, yes.
If that's what
Absolutely.
we're doing, because
Yep.
when I moved in with you, I watched, um, a world where everything was about punishments.
Yep.
Every every time you didn't follow a rule, every time she didn't follow a rule, like the couple that I joined because we did not do triad well, so I was joining. It was all about punishments, but
But
unspoken.
unspoken, unacknowledged
And so
consequences and punishments.
it's not for me to decide how you make boundaries and rules and consequences, but I'll tell you, if you don't have consequences, then you're probably going to hide from yourself how you're actually using um, punishment or coercion to get what you want. And well, big picture, I don't think that's what my listeners are actually thinking they want to do. So if you're out there thinking, well, that's not how I want to be, sure. And we all have childlike parts who are not acting in alignment with our
Hmm.
best principles. So that's a real thing that's happening. I I know we just dove into boundaries, and boundaries deserve their own whole episode for sure. But it's so important to me that we just name that any good agreement we're going to have to start thinking about what boundaries are, what deal breakers are, what the consequences of our actions are, what negotiation looks like. And I have to start
What
grappling with,
negotiation looks like. That's a really good point, because coming up with an agreement is, as you said, that's negotiation.
which means we're right up against power
Which
dynamics
means, ooh,
where we've
yes.
been. So if you haven't listened to the previous few episodes, we've been talking about power dynamics because they've thread through everything. They just do. And so when we do experiments, we shouldn't overlook the fact that power exists in all of these spaces.
Mhm.
So at core, the question I wanted to answer today was, what are some good beginner boundaries? And I know that the disappointment is there is no set of rules. I can't hand out a card and say, here you go, here's a good place to start. If you don't allow this to happen or you always do this, it will definitely work out. But I can say that when you engage in this process with the intention of setting up specific time where you get clear on what it is that you're doing, what you are agreeing to, getting yourself into a place where you are actually clear on your consent to this process, and then setting a time bound parameter so that you know when you're revisiting this, when are you sharing, how has this gone, and not just immediately after the next action is taken, but also at a time when you are well
Yeah. Yep.
resourced and able to really, really wring out this experiment for like, what did we learn? What did
Yeah.
we learn about each other? What did we learn about ourselves? What do we want to do next? And this is exactly what I love to do with people. It is, I mean, so I'm enrolling a group right now. We're enrolling the fourth cohort of the year of opening. It starts May 17th of 2023. If you happen to be listening to this in May of 2023, you can reach out to me. You can just email me, jolie@joliehamilton.com. And the reason I'm inviting you to do that is if you've been listening to me and can talk about this stuff, and you've been like, okay, I'm ready for the next step. The next step is the year of opening. That's the next step. I know it sounds like a lot to commit to a year. You're committing to your whole life, you're committing to yourself. We're simply providing a container where you can do this and continually be called back into the process, your process. Um, it's
Your process.
it's
Yeah.
yours.
Your life will develop. You will change. How much influence do you want to have over those changes?
Right, but it's also not about somebody just recently said, so I hear you on like there's a lot to learn, and there is. I mean, I have a whole curriculum that we walk through. It is not a course though. I live teach everything and I teach it in a new order for every like I always meet the group where they are, and every group has their own needs. So I take this vast amount of curriculum and tools and material that I have and I customize it for your group, but it's not like you're going to wait a year to have learned stuff. It is
Oh,
not
yeah.
it is not an experience where okay, now I'm going to learn this and I'm going to have to like learn the steps and then in a year then we'll consider opening up. Not at all. In fact, many people come in having already opened. They're already up to their hips in all the stuff. Many people do. The point is that we're going to thoughtfully structure a space where you stay in the stuff. You stay in the individuation of it. You stay in the process. And we do that while you're going through the things. So if you are right at the beginning, yeah, you'll be designing your first steps in the first few weeks. That's how we get change. And now the dogs have decided that we should finish.
The dogs
I
say we're
think
done.
I think we should.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
If you want in on the year of opening, now's your moment. Message me. You can also go to theyearofopening.com and you can there's right there it'll say waitlist because I'm anticipating signing up the September cohort, but this is your last chance before September. So get on it.
Get on it.
Now's the moment. Join me on a phone call. do it now because the group's already two-thirds full. So there's probably only a few spaces left by the time you're hearing this. And if you've been listening, yeah, we want to talk to you. And Ken is present in
Yes.
every group.
Reach out.
This is an exciting time for
It
us
is.
as we enroll a new group and we start fresh with
Love
them.
that.
Love to have you join us. There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com and find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.